We are going to ask everybody to mute themselves. It's just giving it a couple more minutes, or just at about 12:30. So I'll go ahead and start if we have any more folks join us. I would like to, I can't say welcome you all to the Geneva Historical Society, because we're not the Geneva Historical Society anymore. We're Historic Geneva, and you're not here. But virtually, we're very happy to have you all join us today for the Historic Geneva History Sandwiched In program, the final one for 2021. We actually managed to pull off a pretty full slate of programming this year. And so it is the end of the year, and that is all we have for events except for today's program, which is going to be brought to us by our staff member and coworker, Mel, who has the longest title of anybody who works here, so I have to read it so I don't miss any of it. Mel is our Visitor Services and Programs Manager at Roosevelt and Johnston House, and she is going to tell you I think a little bit more about how she came to work in historic sites, I suspect, and why she loves historic house museums, and why you should too. So I'm going to turn things over to Mel. If you have questions over the course of the program, please put them in the chat. We'll go through them at the end, and make sure you stay on mute, please. Thank you.
Bear with me here. Okay, here we go. Welcome again. My name is Mel Oles, and I am the Visitor Service and Program Manager at Rose Hill Mansion and the Johnston House. So where did historic house museums come from, and why do we have them? What is there to love about them? I will talk about why I love historic houses and why they matter. I will give a very quick history of the origin of historic houses as museums and historic attractions, talk about historic homes in other countries and how they're similar and different from those in the United States. And I'll discuss historic homes and they've changed over times and their different uses. I'll also explore methods historic house museums have adopted to create and engage in quote unquote immersive experiences in efforts to increase attendance. By examining these ways in which certain historic house museums have revised the guided tour experience in order to attract visitors. I will reevaluate the traditional lecture style guided tour and explore how historic houses can engage, educate, and entertain visitors in order to continue to operate successfully. I will explore the idea of the immersive experience as a new approach to interpretation, which can facilitate a meaningful experience for visitors of all ages, interests, and backgrounds. The immersive experience includes audio presentation, interactive environments, the guided presentations, and self-guided tours. My presentation will explore examples of historic museums that uses immersive experiences in order to engage broader experiences that have traditionally attended these museums. These sites include the Thomas Cole National Historic Site in Catskill, New York, the Theodore Roosevelt Inaugural Site in Buffalo, New York, Weir Farms National Historic Site in Wilton, Connecticut, Edgar Allan Poe National Historic Site in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which is very different from the first three that I mentioned, but I'll explain that further. All of these historic sites associated with a certain individual, they share similar demographics. They have collections of artifacts, artworks, which are interpreted for these publics. I will examine these sites and learn how these immersive experience engage visitors in which contributes to sustainability of these institutions and increase revenue. Historic houses are defined by buildings, which are important events took place, where a significant historical figure lived, or a representation of an accurate, a particular period of American history, or a combination of these. Unlike other museums, historic house museums display a collection of artifacts in its original context, which provides visitors with a rich historical experience. Despite these positive features, historic house museums face many problems, including low visitor numbers, aging visitor populations, and high preservation bills. Resorting in low attendance, many historic house museums are in danger in closing their doors. Here I have an example of an object with like kind of the white wall around it, kind of what we would see in the Met or another large museum, and an object in a historic house museum. Obviously, we know what these objects are, but to see it in its kind of historical context gives it a completely different feeling. This is an obvious example. I was trying to look for a tool which in a white box against white walls, and then seeing it maybe in an agriculture museum, and you would see its use, but I wasn't able to find an example for today. Here's a very, very quick history of historic house museums. The first historic house museums were founded in the early 19th century, and many of these historic houses were established because of their links to war and politics. The very first historic house museum was George Washington's, which is very obvious, is Mount Vernon in 1858, followed by his headquarters in Newburgh, which is one of my personal favorites and kind of close to some degree to us today. I highly recommend visiting that. And following that, many sites, Revolutionary War sites, were set aside during the early 19th and early 20th centuries. Besides obvious president homes, as historic site structures, exceptional examples of particular styles of American architecture were historic sites museums. Starting in the 1960s, even more historic sites were founded as museums. Each town wanted to preserve its kind of oldest or best example of a house in their town to tell their community story. However, many of these towns didn't have adequate funding or support from the broader community to support these historic houses. Many people ask, how many historic house museums are in the United States? There's approximately 15,000 in the United States. What is the attraction of these sites? Well, they appeal to most everybody. They're part of our quote unquote collective memory of place. Many of us can relate to the home, the kitchen, bedroom, etc. It's the stories that these places bring alive. It's the people who are telling these stories. Most museums, historic house museums, are stories of people who are high income, rich, people who have already passed, stunning examples or interesting architectural designs. Few historic house museums tell stories of typical people, day-to-day people, women. However, this is very much changing. Many historic houses are being saved in the past many years, of stories of people day to day, people of many different ethnic groups, and people now are rethinking of the stories that are being told inside the historic houses, that they're not just the buildings themselves, but also thinking of the landscapes around the houses, the objects inside, and really all of the stories of all the people who lived inside the buildings. The buildings that I have listed here, the Harriet Tubman, which is right down the road from us today in Auburn, Martin Luther King, which is in Atlanta, which I visited, which I really enjoyed because you can also visit the church that he preached at in Atlanta. I have not been to the Louis Armstrong, which is in Queens, but they play records of him practicing. And then A Christmas Story is a for-profit museum of the famous movie, but you can actually tour the house where the movie was made. Very different from the other three examples, but I thought that was kind of fun to put in. So historic houses in around the world. Starting with England, I thought it was very interesting that in England, many of them are independent, privately owned, often family businesses. And that you can stay in historic houses, often kind of like a rental, what we kind of think of an Airbnb, which we don't have often here in the United States. A lot of them are used also in film and TV. The most famous that I can think of today is from the Downton Abbey TV show and films Highclere Castle. And very similar though, guided tours, programs, events, weddings. And then I looked also around in Japan, also a lot of gardens, houses, tea houses, guided tours. Often the tours are in Japan, but the guided audio tours are available in English. I looked in Australia. This one here, Elizabeth Farm, reminds me very much of a living history museum that we have here in the United States. And what I thought was a lot of fun about this was the property is on a property called Rose Hill, and a family that lived here was, one of the families that lived here was the Swans. And here at this place, again, admissions, there is programs that you can attend, gardens, so many similarities. The differences that I would find, of course, were the languages that you would have. This is from my trip to Bogota, Colombia. This was a mansion that was built in the 1820s, and very similar to what we have here, what reminds me of Rose Hill gardens, and a lot of the objects very similar to Rose Hill. Tour similar to ours as well. Differences again with the languages, what have you. But I thought was very interesting was the interpretation the same though, the dining room, the same as ours, kind of dressed the same. What I love about the image on the top right is that they have these beautiful round windows to let the light in, and that it was these doors open to the air, and that they would have these panels discussing the dining room that you could read. Similar, very similar, even though this was in Colombia, besides again, like the panels was in a different language, but the kitchen, fake food, arranged what we would think of in a historic house that we would see here today. I'm going to talk about now the immersive experience that I spoke about in the beginning of the presentation. I'm going to start off with the Thomas Cole National Historic Site. I worked here at this historic site before coming to Rose Hill and the Johnston House. Give you a quick little background on the Thomas Cole site. The Thomas Cole National Historic Site is the home and studio of Thomas Cole, 1801 to 1848. The Thomas Cole site pursues its educational mission through a combination of tours, exhibits, publication, website features, lectures, symposiums, and public programs. The Cole site recently revised its visitor experience and moved away from the traditional guided tour to this immersive experience. And it currently offers audio enhancements, hands-on, guided portions, and self-guided areas. And these kind of new insights for visitors is really led to this new attendance surge. When I started, we had about 12,000 visitors to the site, and when I left, we had about 30,000 visitors to the site. So very positive reaction to it. And I think that the immersive elements that we added really help increase that. First one I'm going to talk about is our additions of projections. You'll notice that we added to the top of the ceiling. This was the second kind of period room, you could say, that people would come in. They would sit on these chairs, and a short video film would play for about a couple minutes, 3 minutes. And it would show a video of his film, his works of art, and it would be an actor's voice saying the words of Thomas Cole, and would really bring to life this room, and you would really get to kind of hear from himself, Thomas Cole, you know, kind of bring him back to life, not just hearing it from the guide. You kind of felt like you were hearing it from Thomas Cole. And it really kind of took this, you didn't feel like you were in the typical historic house museum experience here. This really kind of took people by surprise. It was a theatrical kind of experiment. This kind of felt like you're almost in a cinema here, which really worked, I think, well for the Thomas Cole site because of the works of art. And here's an image of people sitting and watching this. Here we have removal of ropes. And we really removed all ropes, even on the chairs and stuff. And this really gave this warmth, this kind of felt like this, they just stepped out of the room. And people really felt welcomed here. This was the first room, as you can kind of see in the far back right, people walked in the front door, and this was the first room they visited. And also historically, this would be where people would come and meet with the family. So it was appropriate. And people really liked the feeling, and this was worked really well with our visitors. Reproductions. So most of Thomas Cole's works of art are either in the Met or all around the world, Washington, D.C., in the Louvre. So, we used reproduction works of art. On the left, you'll see on the table by the guide, so people could pick up and see, letters. And then on the image on the right, works of art on the wall, like they were hung, what he would have had. And then here we have Thomas Cole's desk, and I have an image of Ohio State building that he worked on and a church. They were true to size on old paper, and then on the back was the date and title. So if a visitor really wanted to know the date or the title or something, the guide could pick it up, turn it over. But if kind of, again, had that feeling that Thomas Cole just stepped out of the room, he was working on a piece of artwork, and kind of brought it to life there. And this was a big move for us. On the image on the top left, we have the Thomas Cole's studio with his two easels, nothing on the easel. And then the image on the bottom has the reproduction of the Voyage of Life. That was one of our kind of claims of fame, is that he painted the famous series, The Voyage of Life, in the studio in Catskill. And we always kind of pondered, should we put reproductions in this room? It's kind of was a sacred space for us and for visitors, and to put a reproduction in this room, was it okay? Was it right? And I'll talk about this when I get to Weir Farms. And we went ahead and did a reproduction, one of them true to size, and put it on one of his easels. And it was a real hit. People really loved to see the size of it, got to see how it would have felt as if he was working on one of his works of art. And again, had that kind of just stepped out of the room. And you really kind of felt like the studio was alive. Sound. We had Thomas Cole's guitar and case. That's the image of it on the left. It looks like a little coffin, but that was his case. And there's an image of it on the settee. The kind of, I can't remember if it was a photograph or a painting. It's a contemporary work of art above the settee. Just please ignore that for today. We had contemporary artists put works of art every year into the building, but we would have the visitor walk into this room, and we'd have them look at the guitar, and we had a letter that Cole said, do you remember that time I played this song for you? I forget where he was. I think he was in England. I can hear them playing it, out of the window. And it was really lovely. It was really, it was kind of a nice, loving, letter to his wife. And we would have the tour guide with this very low tech boombox play a recording that someone made for us, because we had the letter, which he wrote this, the name of the song. And that really brought that room alive for a couple moments, and that object alive of hearing that song. Finally, here we have touch. We wanted people to understand the steps it took to get to the Thomas Cole's work of art. So next time they're in the Met in New York City or what have you, and they see one of Thomas Cole's master works of art, they can understand what it took to get to that final piece. Because maybe we didn't have that Voyage of Life or what have you. So we wanted to show all the different steps of grinding the pigment, using the linseed oil and what have you to get to that. but the logistics of linseed oil and pigments that sometimes could have different chemicals in it, we just couldn't figure out how to do that with the general public, with thousands of people going through. So we ended up finally just using this very simple mortar and pestle, the image that I have there on the right, where people would just pick that up and just move it around in their hands. And believe it or not, that was great for them. And they just, the idea of having that in their hands and thinking about him grinding his pigments in his studio. And that was what we did for Touch. We had great reviews in the press, which really brought a lot of people back. And also in comment cards and surveys and things like that. Next, I'd like to talk about the Theodore Roosevelt site. It is a national park, and it offers both guided and self-guided tours of the building and grounds. And in 2009, it completely transformed its site into a full immersive venue. The site was renovated to take visitors back in time to both the excitement of Buffalo's Pan-American exhibition and the day Roosevelt became president in 1901. And the site added audio-visual segments, interactive environment, guided tour portions, self-guided areas with this whole kind of web-based program. And they changed the whole area, and they saw an increase of attendance, income, and really a positive media coverage. What I thought was very interesting is that they changed their orientation room when you first come. When I saw their orientation room, this reminded me very much of a history museum, a science museum, not what you expect when you visit a historic house museum. Here on your left, you see, sorry for the poor image, what it used to look like. You would come into a room and you would watch a couple-minute film before entering the rest of the guided experience. Now you do this interactive, you look at objects, you touch things, you play, maybe that's not the word, play games, you answer questions, you learn about what was happening in 1901 before you go on your tour. So you have context of what is, you kind of jump back in time and get your mindset. Also smell, which I thought this was one of the funnest thing. There is something that they use is called a smellometer. I'm going to come back to that. There it is right there, hiding behind this little piece of furniture. A lot of hospitals and casinos use these to project smell into the atmosphere. In this room, they were telling the story. It's the morning. It's coffee, the smell that they were projecting. It's right at breakfast, and the chairs pulled out, the newspapers on the table, and you really got the feeling that, again, the idea of someone just left the room, you went in through a time machine, you went back in time, and you really got that sense of through smell, which I love. Next, which is very unexpected, is that you watch a film. You would never think in a historic house, you go through these rooms, that you're going to sit down and watch a film. And I apologize for these images. It's very hard to take a picture of a film. And it's not a film on a flat screen. They're lighting objects and telling stories. And it's only a few minutes. So it's kind of hard to see this, but they're lighting images and telling stories and kind of, again, taking you back in time and telling you what is happening in 1901, putting you in the mind of Roosevelt. So you're understanding what's going as he's becoming president. They also removed a lot of ropes, so you're freely walking around the room, looking at objects and not having that feel of that with the ropes in the room. And sound, there is this telegram that's making the because he's getting the news that, oh my gosh, you're all of a sudden president, the excitement of the press. And there's all of these clippings of the press and the excitement. So you're kind of getting excited for him and what's going through his mind, and that kind of the sound in the room. You get really kind of excited. And then the other thing that kind of throws it off is that you go to the second floor and then there's this whole self-guided tour. Your guide leaves you, and this is a whole self-guided experiences, which is very different from many historic house museums. This is a president's desk that you can sit down, and the whole desk is interactive and you can play with it and things like that. But what's great about it too is there's a camera that takes a photo of you and it can send a picture of you through email. So they grab your email, can add it to their list. And it reminds me of when you go on roller coasters and they take that picture of you coming down and then they like send it to you, they capture it. But it's kind of a nice little like thing from your trip. But they also capture your email, and it's this whole kind of interactive second floor, self-guided. So if you have places to go, you don't have to stay here, or you can stay all afternoon. And then it's a lot of, what was happening then and what is happening today. So it's kind of a lot of what's relevant to today, how you can relate a lot to the past, which I love these. The staff puts newspaper clippings from the past and the newspaper clippings of today. So you can see the things that were happening in the press in 1901, like the little boy, working in the mines, and, how child labor. And then maybe there was clippings of things happening with kids, today, and there's kid, playing soccer. So it's kind of, again, relating what was happening in politics in the past and how they're relatable today. So just a very different experience. And instead of pointing out every object in the house, you can go and sit at this desk and hit on different things and learn about objects in the house. Just a very different historic house museum tour. My next example is the Weir National Historic Site. It's a national park, and it interprets the life and work of an American Impressionist painter, J. Allan Weir, and he was born 1852 to 1919. Jaden Allen Weir was a leading figure in American art and development of American Impressionism. After Weir's artistic legacy continued by his daughter, painter Dorothy Weir Young, and her husband. Today, the 60-acre park, which includes the Weir House, the Weir and Young Studios, barn, gardens, and the Weir Pond. The Weir's house is a tour by park rangers, and both of the studios are self-guided. The Weir site uses reproduction works of art. And then inside the house, there's a lot of hands-on activities. And that is what I used when we were at the Thomas Cole National Historic Site. Here is one of the studios, because again, there's 2 studios on site, and that is a reproduction of a work of art on one of the artist's easels that we use. And that's another image of another reproduction on an artist's easel. And then here is an example of a hands-on activity, which is very appropriate because they were landscape artists that did a lot of sketching outside, or what some people call plein air. So it would be a great activity for people to do while on that site. Just to use this one as contrast to the other 3, because of their budgets, because of their technology, the people that I used as examples, I would like to use this one as an example, the Edgar Allan Poe National Historic Site in Philadelphia. During Poe's 6 years in Philly, he lived in 5 different houses. This is the only one that survives. Just before moving here, his young wife, Virginia, was diagnosed with tuberculosis. They moved to this house for the bright air to kind of help with her lungs. And again, I wanted to show this one for the sharp contrasts because there's no original objects, projections, high technology, things like that. But I thought this house was so successful because Poe would write the telltale heart, and he would also write the black cat. And this house would make your hair rise on the back of your neck down in this basement, because they would use the most low technology thing of the heart bumping. And you would go into these rooms and you would see his inspiration. Here they just use screens to give you an idea what it might have looked like. Again, nothing, no huge productions, high, tech level here. But still, when you went into the room, I wish I had a recording of that heartbeat. You got the idea of Poe and why he would have written his things here. And I love this, a very low tech thing of, we look out our windows today and we see modern buildings, cars, what have you, and that they just use this very simple screen to show you what Poe might have seen when he looked out the window. And then I'd like to talk real quick about Rose Hill and all the kind of exciting things that we are doing there and hope to do there in the near future. So we do a little touch there. There's an example of a tile drain. We have one that has been broken, and we allow our visitors to touch one of the tile drains. We talk about it and how the farmers would have used it, and it's important, both our historic Geneva history, state history, and national history. But to have the visitor touch it and to hold it makes a difference. We also use Reproductions. There on the left is Robert Swan's desk. This is his office. We have maps and things like that on his desk, so people can get the idea that he's working here in his office. And then we're thinking about using sound here in the back of the back of the mansion, because it was this farm, this very, very active farm with people, with animals. So we're looking into low tech ways to do an addition of sound, because these touch, sound, smell really bring things to life. Talking about smell, I hear of an image of the kitchen, of bringing the smell of a kitchen, because smell brings memory, brings memories to us as we walk through. So talking about findings and impacts discussion here, at the Thomas Cole site, we were able to see the attendance records. Again, talking about when I started, we had about 12,000 visitors, and when I left, we had about 30,000 people, because they were able to kind of get in the mind of Thomas Cole, see his vision, see his inspiration, through kind of being able to immerse themselves into his works of art, be able to kind of stand where he did, and want to return. I think that's the key too, that these historic houses aren't just dusty old places, that they are definitely changing and alive and full of people, and things are happening, and that this immersive experience is a way to increase revenue and sustainability. It's definitely not the only way. It's just one possibility. There's so many other things. It's just one, and it doesn't work for everyone, and there's definitely different ways out there, as you can see, compared to Poe, and it doesn't have to be this high tech. And we did comment cards over at Rose Hill, trying to measure and see the data, and people in their comment cards just said how much they loved the stories of the people. They loved being in the spot where history what happened, and how informative those were, the kind of the recording that we had. And kind of to end on, why does this matter? I love historic houses because you can stand where this important artwork was inspired, where a document was signed, where a battle was fought. You can kind of see this whole picture, compared to going to a museum where white walls and this object has been removed and put in a case, and there's just the label to read. It's kind of the closest thing that we have to a time machine. It's one of the closest way that we can go back in time and relate to people and see how much we have in common with people in the past. Most major museums only have 10% of their collection out on display at a single moment. However, historic house museums are showing as much as they can and having out as much as they can. And I think that's why one of my favorite parts of going to a historic house museum is that you can just really travel back in time and understand what was going through people's minds and what was happening. And thank you so much for your time today. I hope you enjoyed my presentation.
Thank you very much, Mel. I don't know if we have any questions. If you do, please put them in the chat so we can answer them. If Mel can answer them, I can't answer them probably. I do want to thank you very much. I've been to a couple of those sites, not all of them though, so now I have some to put on my list for future trips. I know the Roosevelt site I went to for a museum event, and I don't know if they had all of those things in place. I remember the exhibit, but I don't remember the video component. Do you know if that's been there from 2009 when they did the remainder of the work?
You mean the film?
Where you could sit at the Oval Office desk, and then there was a video. There were a couple video elements that you showed, which I don't remember being there, but that might just be because I was there for a meeting and I may not have had time to look at everything in the site. But I do remember the exhibit about the fair that was going on when McKinley was assassinated, and how interesting that was. And the story of the house and the assassination is such a different story from so many other houses. So I thought that was really cool. So yeah, definitely some other things to see. We are not getting any questions right now, so I guess you satisfied everybody's curiosity on historic houses and why they matter, Mel. So somebody, thank you to the right who enjoyed the program. Thank you all for coming as well. So I'm going to wrap it up then, since we seem to be finished, and thank Mel for her excellent presentation. Now people have a few ideas of new places to visit. And if you haven't been to Rose Hill in a while, come out and see what we do there next season when we reopen. Thank you all very much, and we hope to see you at the holiday market starting tomorrow. Bye.